Days before his death, Larry Fine broke. Silence about Curly Howard. Larry Fine, born in 1902 in Philadelphia, was best known as the frizzy-haired violinist turned comedian of the Three Stooges. His quick reactions and lovable persona made him the perfect balance in the group's slapstick chaos. Curly Howard, born in 1903 in Brooklyn, was the youngest of the Howard brothers and arguably the most beloved stooge. With his childlike innocence, wild energy, and iconic catchphrases like "nuke, nuke, nuke," Curly became a comedy legend. Together, Larry and Curly helped define American slapstick humor, creating laughter that has endured for generations. Early warnings of Curly's fall. If the world adored Curly Howard for his explosive energy and unforgettable antics, Larry Fine was one of the first to witness the quiet unraveling behind the laughter. Long before audiences sensed anything was wrong, Larry observed subtle but troubling changes in his friend and fellow stooge. In the early 1940s, when Curly should have been at his peak, Larry noticed that off-stage he often sat motionless, staring blankly into space as if lost in a world far removed from comedy. Sometimes, when called by name, Curly would not even respond. For a performer known for his quick timing and boundless vitality, these silences were alarming. Larry, who had a habit of keeping notes in the margins of travel diaries and even scribbling behind old scripts, quietly documented what he saw. He described moments when Curly seemed absent, disconnected, almost hollow compared to the vibrant man who transformed into a whirlwind once the cameras rolled. While fans only saw the explosive "nyuk, nyuk, nyuk" and the physical brilliance of his slapstick, Larry bore witness to a different Curly, a man whose spirit seemed to be fading before his body gave way. At the time, medical understanding of neurological decline or dementia was limited. There was no widespread awareness of conditions like strokes, degenerative diseases, or mental health struggles among entertainers. What Larry knew, however, was that something was profoundly wrong. He watched Curly miss cues, forget lines, and increasingly rely on sheer instinct rather than sharp comedic timing. Behind the gags and pratfalls, there were pauses, a hesitation that betrayed a mind under siege. What made Larry's observations so haunting was the contrast. On stage, Curly was still the beloved clown, the heartbeat of the Three Stooges. Off stage, he was a shadow, sometimes withdrawn into silence, other times drifting through rehearsals like a man moving underwater. Larry never confronted him directly, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of fear, but he carried the weight of these realizations alone, scribbling them into private notes no one else would see. In hindsight, Larry's quiet awareness reads like the earliest testimony of Curly's decline. What audiences later recognized as illness had already revealed itself to the friend who stood closest to him. Larry did not have the language of neurology or psychology to describe it, but he understood intuitively. Curly was slipping away, piece by piece, even while the world roared with laughter. That knowledge, unspoken yet deeply felt, left Larry carrying both admiration for his friend's resilience and sorrow for the inevitable collapse that followed. Curly Howard's emotional decline. If Larry Fine had already sensed the quiet signs of Curly Howard's decline, what followed in the years after became even more troubling. Curly's unpredictable swings of emotion. Behind the slapstick, genius, and roaring laughter, there was a man slowly unraveling from within. Those who worked with him described moments when Curly could be laughing uncontrollably, cracking jokes, and lifting everyone's spirits, only to suddenly fall into tears minutes later. Sometimes, without a word of explanation, he would rise from his chair and leave the room, leaving his friends and colleagues unsettled by the abrupt shift. These episodes were not simply exhaustion or moodiness. They seemed to reveal a deeper instability, a mind and heart struggling under invisible weight. Curly himself gave voice to the fear gnawing at him in rare private moments. He confided to Larry Fine, "I don't think I'm funny anymore. I can't perform like I used to." For a man whose identity and career were built on comedy, such doubts cut straight to the soul. It wasn't just about fading health, it was about losing the very gift that defined him. Larry often sat by Curly's side during these breakdowns, offering comfort with quiet words or simply his presence. Outwardly, he reassured his friend, reminding him of the joy he still brought to millions. But inside, Larry was terrified. He knew that what he was witnessing went beyond fatigue. It was a collapse, slow and steady, of a man who had once seemed invincible on stage. Larry's notes from that time captured not just concern but helplessness, the sorrow of watching someone so full of life crumble under forces no one could control. The duality was haunting. On stage, Curly still summoned enough energy to tumble, shout his catchphrases, and deliver the physical comedy fans adored. But off stage, his emotional swings painted a darker picture. He was a man fighting himself, trying to hold onto a spirit that was slipping through his fingers. For Larry, these moments were heartbreaking. To sit next to Curly during one of his silent withdrawals, or to hear his trembling voice question his worth, was to witness the tragedy behind the laughter. In hindsight, these episodes were early reflections of the neurological and psychological toll his health struggles would eventually make undeniable. At the time, however, there were no words, only fear, confusion, and sorrow. Larry's loyalty meant he never abandoned his friend, but he carried the heavy knowledge that Curly's brilliance was being eaten away from within. The world continued to laugh at Curly Howard, but Larry Fine understood the truth. Behind every laugh was a man who, in private, was crying for help. Comedy's cost, brothers broken. If Curly Howard's emotional instability had already shaken the foundations of the Three Stooges, the pressure from the studio revealed just how fragile their bond truly was. By the mid-1940s, Curly's decline had become impossible to hide. He began forgetting lines, even entire routines he had once improvised with brilliance. For the first time, the man who embodied spontaneity could not recall his own creations. On stage, the mistakes were covered with slapstick energy. But backstage, the cracks were undeniable. Mo Howard, usually the strict leader of the trio, grew increasingly frustrated. His sharp discipline, once a tool to keep the comedy precise, now sounded like scolding against his brother's failing strength. Larry Fine, however, saw something deeper. He noticed the fear behind Curly's blank stares and sudden silences, the silent cry of a man terrified of losing not just his role, but his identity. To Larry, Curly wasn't just struggling with illness. He was struggling with the unbearable weight of disappointing those he loved most. When the strain became too great, Larry and Mo approached Columbia Pictures, pleading to give Curly time to rest and recover. But the response was chilling. Executives dismissed their concerns outright, coldly stating, "If Curly can't perform, we'll replace him." For Larry, those words shattered the illusion of family. What had once felt like a brotherhood of performers now revealed itself as a commercial machine, grinding down even its brightest star for profit. The betrayal cut deep. The Three Stooges had always been more than slapstick. They were brothers in laughter, bound by loyalty. Yet in that moment, Larry realized the industry cared nothing for bonds, only for the money Curly could generate. The man who had brought millions to tears of laughter was reduced to a replaceable commodity. For Larry, it was heartbreaking proof that the brotherhood was no longer sacred. They weren't artists protected by their craft. They were products, owned and controlled. The laughter of millions had come at a devastating price, and behind it was a man slipping further away while the world demanded he keep performing. To Larry, it was the cruelest twist. The brotherhood that once gave Curly strength had been betrayed by the very system that profited from his genius. Half-Wit's holiday set tragedy. The mounting pressures and hidden struggles of Curly Howard finally erupted in one devastating moment on the set of Half-Wit's Holiday in 1946. On the day of filming, it was clear to those closest to him that something was terribly wrong. Curly, once the whirlwind of slapstick brilliance, could barely focus on his lines. His dialogue came out broken, stammering, a faint echo of the sharp timing that had once defined him. Larry Fine, who had quietly observed Curly's decline for years, warned the crew that his friend was not well. But the warnings fell on deaf ears. The studio demanded the show go on. During one of the scenes, the unimaginable happened. Curly suddenly collapsed, struck by a massive stroke in front of the cameras and his fellow Stooges. The chaos of slapstick comedy gave way to real chaos. Actors and crew were rushing to his side, helpless as the man who had carried so much of their laughter lay motionless on the studio floor. For Larry, the moment was shattering. He had known something was coming, but to witness it unfold before his eyes was a heartbreak that would never leave him. That day marked the end of Curly Howard's career. Though he would live for several more years, he never fully recovered, and the vibrant performer who had once electrified audiences was gone. Half-Wit's Holiday became both a milestone and a tombstone, forever remembered as Curly's final film. For Larry, it stood as the cruel confirmation of everything he had feared. His friend's genius extinguished not by fading talent, but by a body that could no longer bear the weight of performance. The laughter that had defined an era ended in silence, and the world lost one of its greatest clowns. Curly's fall, Larry's lasting shadows. The collapse on the set of Half-Wit's Holiday marked not only the end of Curly Howard's career, but also the beginning of a painful new chapter for the Three Stooges. Columbia Pictures, cold and pragmatic, wasted no time. Within weeks, Curly was replaced by his brother Shemp, and the studio pushed forward with new shorts as if nothing had happened. To the outside world, the machine of comedy kept rolling. But for Larry Fine, the group would never be the same. Though Larry continued to perform, his spirit carried a weight audiences could never see. On stage, he still delivered the quick reactions and the chaotic charm that defined the Stooges' slapstick. But off stage, he confided that comedy no longer felt like joy. It had become a mask, a shell to hide the pain. Every pratfall and pie fight reminded him of the friend who once transformed chaos into brilliance, but was now gone from the spotlight forever. Larry was haunted not just by loss, but by guilt. He replayed the years leading up to Curly's breakdown, the warnings he gave, the pleas he made to the studio that were ignored. In quiet moments, he wondered if he could have done more, fought harder, spoken louder, refused to perform until Curly was given rest. Instead, the machine of Columbia ground on, and Larry was left to carry the heavy knowledge that his friend's suffering had been sacrificed for profit, even as Shemp brought his own humor and professionalism to the act. Larry never stopped feeling the absence. To him, the Three Stooges without Curly was not truly whole. The laughter of millions continued, but for Larry, each performance carried an echo of tragedy. The stage lights hid it from the audience, But within, he carried the shadow of Curly Howard, a reminder that behind every slapstick routine, there had been a brother whose brilliance was extinguished too soon. Larry Fine's last words of regret. If the years after Curly's departure left Larry Fine carrying the weight of loss, his final years revealed just how deeply that burden had scarred him. As age slowed him down and the chaos of Hollywood faded into memory, Larry began opening up more to close friends and family. He no longer spoke only of the slapstick fun or the roaring audiences. Instead, he admitted to the darker truths that had haunted him for decades. In these intimate conversations, Larry revealed what few outside the Stooges ever knew. Curly had begged more than once to be allowed to rest. Behind the grease paint and comic energy, Curly would retreat to his dressing room, sometimes breaking down in tears because his memory was failing him. He confessed to Larry that he felt like a fraud, terrified that one day he would freeze mid-scene, unable to recall even the simplest gag. According to Larry, these were not rare moments. They happened often, and each time Curly's desperation grew clearer. Yet no one listened. The studio executives dismissed his pleas, seeing only the profits Curly generated. Even Moe, though deeply caring as a brother, often resorted to pushing Curly forward, believing discipline was the only way to keep the act alive. And Larry himself, though he sat beside Curly during many of those breakdowns, felt powerless. He admitted later that his silence, his willingness to keep performing despite knowing the cost, was something he never forgave himself for. "I was part of it," he once told a confidant. Part of the machine that kept him on stage when he should have been given peace. For Larry, those years became not just painful memories, but a form of penance. He described the final period of performing with Curly as torture disguised as laughter. To the audience, they were the height of comedy, an endless fountain of slapstick brilliance. But for Larry, every laugh carried the echo of Curly's suffering, the silent cries from the dressing room, the fear in his eyes when memory betrayed him, the humiliation of being forced to keep going when his body and mind were breaking. Larry's reflections revealed complicity, acknowledging personal choices behind Curly's tragic story. In the end, Larry Fine carried two legacies: the laughter he helped create and the sorrow of the friend he could not save. Both defined him. And as he admitted in those final years, the cost of comedy had always been higher than anyone in the audience would ever know. Larry Fine's last days revealed, after years of carrying both laughter and sorrow, Larry Fine's final days were spent in a quiet hospital room, surrounded not by the chaos of comedy, but by silence. Nurses recalled how he often clutched an old photograph of the Stooges, his fingers trembling as he whispered Curly's name like an unfinished prayer. It was as though, even at the end, his thoughts returned to the brother he could never save. A few days later, fate dealt its cruelest echo. Larry suffered a massive stroke, leaving him unable to speak and paralyzed on one side of his body, the very tragedy that had struck Curly nearly 3 decades earlier. For those who knew his story, it was a chilling reminder of how deeply their lives had been intertwined in comedy and in suffering. On January 24th, 1975, Larry Fine passed away, carrying with him the weight of regret and the legacy of joy. The world remembered him as a clown, a master of slapstick, but in his last breath he was also a man bound by love, haunted by loss, and forever tied to the memory of Curly Howard. Truth behind the last laugh. In the end, the legacy of the Three Stooges is more than slapstick gags and immortal routines. It is a reminder of the human cost hidden behind the spotlight. They were not merely clowns, they were men who carried scars, sacrifices, and wounds that fame never healed. Larry's late confessions shine a light on the truth. Laughter can hide suffering, but it cannot erase it. The final meaning lies in this paradox. Comedy gave joy to millions, yet its creators bore silent tragedies. Their story remains a haunting testament to the fragile line between entertainment and endurance. Just as their legacy endures beyond the laughter, we invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to keep these stories alive.